Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Partner with Buffalo Co-ops. We are so thankful that you're here today and hope that you come away with some new knowledge about worker-owned cooperatives and how you can partner with them. My name is Cecilia Johnson. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be facilitating and working as tech tonight. So if you have any technical issues, please message me. I will now hand it over to my colleague Michael to introduce themselves.
Awesome. Thank you, Cecilia. My name is Michael. Here are they pronouns. I am a cooperative developer at Cooperation Buffalo alongside Cecilia and Andrew. Super excited to be with you all this evening and talk about kind of just growing our support network and how we can work with each other to work to democratize Buffalo's economy. So thank you all for being here. I'll pass it to Andrew.
Hey everybody, my name is Andrew. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the Executive Director of Cooperation Buffalo. Excited to be here with all of you, and I look forward to talking to you a little bit later. I'm going to kick it back to Cecilia to get us going.
Thanks, Andrew. We're going to start off this webinar by going through some community agreements, which are intended to make this session as effective and inclusive as possible. So one mic, please mute yourself when you're not speaking. All are welcome, so you can make yourself comfortable, keep your video on or off, your choice, and take care of your needs at any time. And always assume best intentions and be aware of impacts. Some quick logistics. Please take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat. Michael will model this now. One thing that we have learned in the pandemic is that we need to work cooperatively as a community, and getting to know each other is that first step. We will be, throughout the session, please use the chat to ask questions, communicate with the host and each other. When we do popcorn questions, that means that you are free to speak up at any time. You don't need to wait to be called on. Just please wait your turn. And last but not least, we are recording this to share with you and other interested folks. So if that changes your decision on whether to have your video on or off, please do what feels right for you. Okay, what is popular education? Cooperation Buffalo prides itself on using a pop ed or popular education model. What does this mean? It means that no one knows everything, and together we know a lot. Pop Ed is a collective or group process of education where the teacher and students learn together, beginning with a concrete experience of the participants, leading to reflection on that experience in order to affect positive change. Rick Arnold and Bev Burke. A quick look at our agenda for tonight. We'll be covering what is a cooperative. Then we'll be talking about the local cooperative ecosystem. Then technical aspects of cooperatives and how you can help. Then common issues facing cooperatives. And we will end with questions and discussion. Some big takeaways for tonight. In traditional businesses, capital hires labor, whereas in worker cooperatives, labor hires capital. Like traditional businesses, worker co-ops exist in the capitalist market system. However, worker co-ops operate according to different values, and workers are in control. Cooperatives face challenges specific to the model, which require support from all different types of professional practitioners. So what are cooperatives? A cooperative is an entity designed to meet the common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations of its members. There are many different kinds of cooperatives. There are worker cooperatives, consumer cooperatives, credit unions, producer cooperatives, housing cooperatives, and multi-stakeholder cooperatives. Okay, as discussed in the previous slide, there are many types of cooperatively owned businesses. All cooperatives share the same model, same values and attributes known as the 7 cooperative principles. They are voluntary and open membership, democratic member control, member economic participation, autonomy and independence, education, training, and information, cooperation among cooperatives, and concern for community. Here are some local co-ops that you might be familiar with. So Upstate Niagara Cooperative and Farmer Pirates Cooperative. Those are producer cooperatives. We have consumer cooperatives like Lexington Co-op, African Heritage Food Co-op, and Urban Roots. Here we go. And these are our local worker cooperatives: Bread Hive Bakery and Cafe, the Rose Garden Early Childhood Center, Grow Up, Anyone's Cafe and Bakery in Rochester, New York, and Arts Cafe in Springville, New York.
Cool.
Right,
Thanks.
now I'll pass it on to Michael. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Cecilia. So I'll take it over. So Cecilia just mentioned all different types of co-ops, consumer co-ops, producer co-ops, housing co-ops, things like that. And those are all relevant here. We like to see all different types of co-ops. There are all different types of co-ops locally in Buffalo. At Cooperation Buffalo, we focus on worker-owned cooperatives, worker cooperatives. So what are the specific characteristics of worker-owned cooperatives? First of all, they are for-profit businesses that are owned and controlled by their workers on the basis of one worker, one vote. So one thing that some people sometimes are confused about with co-ops is that, are co-ops nonprofits, are co-ops for-profits? So cooperatives, as we define them, are always for-profit businesses. And on the basis of one worker, one vote, the owners of worker co-ops build stability and wealth, especially for marginalized communities and traditionally low-wage workers. Crucially for cooperatives, those that produce the profits, the workers, decide for themselves what is best to do with them. They don't create wealth for someone else to appropriate and decide what to do with it. They decide for themselves, crucially. There are two ways predominantly that worker cooperatives start. Either as a startup, like any other business, a group of folks have an idea, they want to get together and open a business. This happened in Bread Hive locally. The other way that co-ops start are conversions, which is you take a traditional business like top-down hierarchical boss workers business and you convert it to a worker cooperative. Usually that happens through the selling owner of the business selling it to a group of the workers of that business. And this happened locally at the Rose Garden Child Care Center. Worker co-ops exist in a variety of industries. I always say that they could exist in literally any industry. They are very predominant in the United States and worldwide in childcare, professional services, retail, and home care, but those are just some examples. If you can think of any business in any industry, it could be a co-op. So yeah, it could be anything. Okay, so I wanted to take a quick second before we move on to kind of distinguish between different employee and worker ownership models. You might have heard before, this company is employee owned. This company is has an employee ownership program. That is not necessarily the same thing as a worker cooperative. There are two predominant types of employee ownership plans that are not co-ops. That are both relatively popular. And the most predominant of these is the Employee Stock Ownership Program, or ESOP. A lot of the bigger companies that call themselves employee owned usually are ESOPs and not cooperatives. I'm trying to think. New Belgium Brewery is a very big ESOP, but they're not a cooperative. And I believe they actually got rid of their employee stock ownership program recently. But anyway, so an employee stock ownership program has a characteristic of that is that workers can purchase or be gifted shares in the company, so they're part shareholder. But this doesn't necessarily mean that they have any meaningful control over how the business works. Again, crucially for cooperatives, not only do the workers own the business, they also have collectively 100% of the meaningful say in how the business actually operates. So it's owned, operated, directed all by the workers. And like Cecilia mentioned earlier, there are many, many different types of co-ops, but not all of these are worker owned. The Lexington Cooperative is owned by the folks who go shop there, not those that work there. However, like Cecilia alluded to, there are multi-stakeholder cooperative models. So you can have a co-op that has both a worker owner component and a consumer owner component, which is a model that I think is worth exploring, especially in some of these consumer co-ops, both locally and around the world. So how do worker co-ops work? Workers collectively decide what the business produces, how it's produced, and crucially, what is done with the profits. If a worker co-op makes profit at the end of the year, usually what happens is the workers get together, they decide what of the profits gets reinvested in the business to contribute to its growth and sustainability, and which of the profits go right back to the workers in a form of a dividend that in the co-op world is usually referred to as patronage. And that's usually decided not based on how many shares you own, because again, each person has one equal stake in the cooperative. It's usually defined by how many hours you've worked. And so what happens is patronage, or the dividend given to the worker owners, is literally a reflection of the value they immediately created for the business. And so in its truest sense, it is workers receiving all of the value they create. In the cooperative, each worker owner gets one vote put towards decision making. So again, has nothing to do with how much you've invested, only one person, one vote. This doesn't mean that every worker owner needs to get together and have a meeting about how every single tiny decision is made. Like you don't have to call a meeting of 10 worker owners, say you have a co-op cafe, to decide, what time do you want to close the cafe today? What way are you going to prepare this specific sandwich? That can be delegated to different bodies or individuals. So worker owners often do delegate power to other individuals or groups, like the board of directors, maybe a specific manager, a shift leader, even one specific staff member, or can decide to do more direct democracy, like general assemblies. And we'll get into this a little bit more later, but it is the upshot of all of this is that at the end of the day, all of the worker owners decide what goes on. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have to make every single decision, but at the end of the day, they have that delegation power as well as decision-making power. And like traditional businesses, worker co-ops operate in the market for business to generate revenues. So one of the realities of the current economic situation locally and nationally is that co-ops compete alongside both other co-ops and traditional businesses and need to play by those rules, which implies a lot of things about how co-ops need to run. Why do we care so much about worker co-ops? Why is this my job that I care a lot about? So a lot of benefits for workers, often better pay and benefits than the industry standard. Workers have asset ownership. They say that they own a thing, which is uncommon, especially in communities marginalized by the capitalist system. And again, they have meaningful say in their day-to-day lives, which is something that is not available to most wage workers in this country. But it's not only just good for workers. It's good for, if you're looking at it from the perspective of business ownership or businesses in general. Co-ops often have higher productivity and growth for employees in a business. Lower employee turnover because people feel more invested because they are part owner of the business. And because of these things, co-ops are often more resilient than traditional businesses and are around longer. And if you look at the communities that these co-ops are in, oftentimes communities rich in cooperatives have a local spending multiplier, which just means that more money stays in the local economy rather than, you know, being given to multinational corporations like Amazon. Often co-ops coincide with higher voting levels and civic activity and other social benefits such as, you know, lower unemployment, lower poverty, many other benefits like that. And this all comes from the Pathways to Scale article by Project Equity. Cool. So like I mentioned earlier, there are 2 ways to start a co-op, and I'm going to give a little detail about how both of these are done. So starting a worker co-op, a startup. So like any other business, a co-op startup begins with an idea to create a business that meets a need in the community. Like other businesses, co-ops need to follow similar legal and tax procedures, create a business plan, obtain permits, on and on and on. Any of you who have done any work or know people who started a business know how onerous going from the idea phase to opening your doors can be. For co-ops, this process is undertaken by a team instead of an individual who intend to be equal owners of the business. Again, 1 person, 1 vote, and commit to the 7 cooperative principles that Cecilia mentioned earlier. Co-ops can be incorporated in a variety of ways in New York State. In New York State, there is a special cooperative corporate subchapter for incorporation. It's known as Subchapter T. We'll get into that in a second. And thanks in advance to all you legal and accounting folks for helping co-ops navigate this very arcane system. Cooperative, oh yeah, so that's how you start up a worker co-op. The other way is a conversion. So like I mentioned, a conversion is a process by which a traditional business is converted into a worker co-op. This is done almost every time without exception. It is done through a sales transaction to sell the existing business to a new worker cooperative. And this is usually financed by an outside lender or the selling owner, or by issuing non-voting equity shares, or some combination of all of those, which Andrew's going to talk about in a second. An interesting piece about conversions is that a selling owner can either leave the business completely or can stay on as one of the new worker owners. So what happens is the cooperative as a whole, as an entity, buys the business from the selling individual owner. So what could happen is the individual owner sells the business to the cooperative, but then stays on as one of the several worker owners, as long as they're cool with this idea that they are now on equal footing with several of the previous staff of that cooperative. So either the owner can leave or they can stay on, but either way it works. Some or all of the workers can be the initial worker owners of the new cooperative. At most worker cooperatives, as they actually exist, there are 2 classes of workers. There is the worker owner class, and then there are regular staff, like paid employees, non-owner employees. Almost every cooperative has this. The goal is to get to a place where every single worker in the business is also an owner. Crucially, at all co-ops, staff have some kind of runway to get into ownership. There is a process by which any single staff can become an owner. And at many co-ops, this is highly encouraged. And in some co-ops, it's required after a year or 2 of employment there. You either have to start along the ownership track or you have to find some other job. So that's one of the ways in which we're kind of dealing with the ideal of all workers owning everything all the time and the reality of we're competing in a capitalist market and there are constraints there. I could keep talking about that, but for another time maybe. So if we're dealing with businesses who are thinking about, selling their business, retiring, something like that, we usually give them a pitch similar to this. Is a conversion right for you in your business? It might be right if you want the positive impacts they've built into the business. A lot of owners are excited about the fact that they've given their staff good jobs, connection to the community, best practices that they've learned in the sector to last beyond their time as an owner. Do they want to maintain their legacy? Like maybe their business is beloved in the neighborhood and like they don't want to see it turn into like a combo KFC Taco Bell. They want it to be, some beloved local restaurant. Do you believe as an owner that the risks and rewards of ownership can reinforce a culture of high quality work and shared responsibility that improves productivity and the bottom line in your business? And conversion often offers owners a chance to receive a fair value from the sale of the business they've built rather than just liquidating it. So there are a lot of reasons why we try to encourage business owners looking to move on to the next thing to sell it to their employees. Cool. I'm going to pass it to Andrew. I know that was like a whole lot. I just ask you to either, if you have any questions so far or comments, please post them in the chat for now. Otherwise, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. But yeah, I'll pass it to Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I've got a little bit more content to get the wheels turning, and then we're going to get to questions and discussion, and we've carved out like 20 or 30 minutes for that. So hopefully we can both like engage in some discussion around some of the things we brought up, but also just like get to know each other and start to build relationships as folks that are interested in supporting these kinds of businesses. Okay, so I've got two main things to talk about. First, just getting into a little bit more of the nitty gritty about how cooperatives here in Buffalo, here in New York State, in the US function. And I think I've got a handy chart to walk through a couple pieces of that. Okay, so first, formation and entity choice. So we're in the legal realm here for a minute. As Michael mentioned earlier, in New York State, there is a particular legal statute for cooperative corporations. So this is different than the business corporation law. It's cooperative corporations, CCO. And under that, there's a particular article, Article 5A, that actually sets up a structure for a worker cooperative corporation. This is really handy. Not every state has a statute particularly outlining a way for a cooperative to match up with their tax obligations and also with the goals of cooperatives more broadly, like those 7 principles that Cecilia mentioned earlier. Some worker cooperatives do set up as LLCs. LLCs are very flexible, obviously. And there can be some particular reasons why that's really vital. In the New York City area, a lot of our colleagues who work in cooperative business development are also working with a lot of immigrant and refugee communities and folks who might be undocumented and folks with ITIN or ITIN numbers, right, instead of a social security number. And they're able to be co-owners of LLCs in a way that they can't be co-owners of a corporation. That's just one example why that LLC structure might make more sense for folks. We in Buffalo have tended toward encouraging people to set up under the worker cooperative corporation structure just because it's a little bit more beneficial, I think, because everything's there for them just to kind of pick up and run with. But there's going to be lots of unique situations in everybody's business model that might lead them to one or the other. Business might opt to just be structured legally as a normal business corporation under New York state law, or also the benefit corporation statute, which locks in some community benefit aspects to what otherwise is a normal corporate structure. And certainly bylaws and operating agreements and these other tools, and even just internal policies of the company can create a lot of the necessary structures for business to operate on that one worker, one vote, or some of these other cooperative principles, even if they don't go for the worker cooperative corporation statute. Okay, so that's formation a little bit, just a snippet. The lawyers on the call can talk much more about this than I can. In the realm of taxes, right? There is a particular taxation chapter the IRS has created called Subchapter T, built specifically for cooperatives. Now, this is for all cooperative businesses. So agricultural co-ops, which are producer cooperatives, right? Consumer cooperatives and worker cooperatives all might opt to be taxed this way. Why would they choose this? It's an interesting blend between subchapter S and subchapter C, or just a normal C corporation, right? Where C corps have that double taxation situation where the corporation first gets taxed on any of its profits, and then any distributions are also taxed at the personal level, right? And so that's why a lot of folks opt for subchapter S if they're structured as a corporation, if they can, because the corporation doesn't pay any corporate tax, it just gets taxed at the personal level, right? So there isn't that double taxation issue. The subchapter T model, very high level simplified version of this, is that a cooperative is allowed to keep some money in its collective reserves that stays in the company, is collectively owned by the cooperative. That profit gets taxed at the corporate level and stays in the company. And then anything that is distributed to the worker owners or to the members of the cooperative as their patronage dividends, that's a term that Michael used earlier that particularly applies to cooperatives, doesn't get taxed at the corporate level. Typically, there's some exceptions to that, and instead gets taxed at the personal level. So you've got some money being taxed on the personal side because it's distributed to the worker owners themselves, and some that's taxed on the corporate side and stays in the company. There's more nuance to it than that, but that's the gist of it. LLC cooperatives will often use K1 statements, right? So where any of the company's profits has to get shown on personal tax statements for the individual owners. I've interestingly seen one LLC cooperative model from some colleagues of ours in Asheville, North Carolina, where they actually used an LLC, had K1s for the members, but then also created another LLC that was called the retained earnings member. And that other LLC's sole job was just to take retained earnings profits and hold it in the separate entity to kind of mimic that collective account that the corporations use. They're still experimenting with it in Asheville. I was just talking to them about it a couple of weeks ago, but it's an interesting way to sort of apply some of the tools at hand to still model after the broader sort of co-op goals. A little bit about employment and HR. In worker co-op corporations, at least, typically, owners are also W-2 employees. So there's these two aspects, these two hats that the individuals wear in the co-op, and they've got to be aware of when they're doing co-op owner or member responsibilities and when they're thinking of themselves as employees. So membership in the cooperative and employment in the company are related, but often distinct, right? So someone could be fired from the company, and whether or not that also triggers losing their membership in the cooperative has to be included in the bylaws of that company somewhere. And this is just something that I believe is true for anyone in any kind of small business, but certainly for co-op members, these worker owners or owners of the company, they need to know the basics of hiring and firing and employment law and obligations and those responsibilities, because at the end of the day, they're the folks that have to oversee each other and making sure that they're adhering to all of these things. And on the governance and management side of things, if a worker co-op is structured as a corporation, there will probably be a board of directors. The board will probably have officers. Typically in cooperatives, any sort of delegated or representative group like a board of directors is going to be made up almost 100% of members of the cooperative, so of worker owners, right? It's just a representative group of them. You can have community representation or other stakeholder groups at the table on your board if you'd like to, but certainly that balance of like making sure we're actually worker owned and governed is, you want to take that into account when you're crafting these things. And owners and boards of directors may hire managers to handle traditional management tasks. To Michael's point earlier, some co-ops are still very hierarchical in terms of the jobs and the responsibilities. And some, especially at smaller scales, if you're a co-op of 3 or 4 or 5 people, let's say, you can engage in more collective or participatory management structures that don't require a cafe manager necessarily, but rather there's 3 people that manage different aspects of the cafe and talk to each other about what they're doing. A lot of different experiments in participatory and more collective styles of management out there. And we've got a lot of resources and connections to folks who've been experimenting with that for a long time and can get our clients in touch with those folks. So that's just some of the details. Now I want to talk about just a handful of common issues that we've seen come up with the clients that we've worked with the worker co-ops that we've either been a part of or helped to support. So first one's a biggie, which is part of the main reason why we're having sessions like this and inviting you all to the table, right? Like there's a general lack of understanding of the model. Advisors to businesses, to small businesses, often dissuade co-op entrepreneurs because of the perception that there's less support for this model, or that this model is unproven or somehow, more risky for folks. I don't believe it's more inherently risky. It just needs different things, right? It needs different skill sets and interest levels from the worker owners that are owning these businesses. And yeah, I mean, I'll give an example of this. Prior to Cooperation Buffalo launching, I worked for 6 years at the Small Business Development Center at Buffalo State College as a business advisor. And boy, I had to do a lot of pleading with the other business advisors who had been doing this work a long time to not just adamantly tell people, no, a cooperative is a terrible idea. Like that was usually the first thing out of their mouths. And instead I got them slowly to say, oh, go talk to Andrew. They have some experience with those models, and it's not actually this far flung of an idea. There's support for it. So just overcoming that is a big thing, because I feel like a lot of people who are interested in this get turned off pretty quickly, depending on who the first person is that they talk to. In financing, traditional lenders, so I'm thinking like corporate banks for the most part, some of our CDFIs and credit unions are often wary of the cooperative model because there's lots of co-owners, right? They think that's a risk. There's lots of people who might like rock the boat. And these days it's always the case that traditional lenders want personal guarantees from an individual or from a few individuals to essentially back the dollar amount of whatever the loan is worth. In a cooperative, it can be a great way for 10 people who don't have those individual assets themselves to come together and co-own something. But a bank usually doesn't want to give little personal guarantees out to 10 different people for portions of that loan. So they just kind of get turned off. So lending capital particular to cooperatives is necessary. There are national CDFIs and other lenders and investors that particularly support cooperatives that don't require these personal guarantees. And we are members of one of those lending institutions called Commons, which I'll mention in just a minute. Also, if you're looking at investment capital, investors usually want decision-making power in exchange for the money that they dump into a business, right? Like if I've given 50% of the startup capital of the company, I expect to sit on the board, I expect to have a say in certain matters, but that doesn't fly in the whole cooperative mantra of one member or one worker, one vote, right? It's just based on the individual people who are actually employed at the company getting to make those decisions, not this outside capital having to say. So that turns off a lot of traditional investor types to want to give their money to this sort of project. Obviously, ongoing recessions and the pandemic has been hard for all small businesses. Interestingly, some of the research that the US Federation of Worker Co-ops did nationally was showing that co-ops tended to reduce hours rather than lay folks off or shut down at a higher level than other small businesses. So there's a little bit of like, yes, being a small business or a micro business is incredibly hard, and that's true across the board. And there is a little bit of this extra resiliency that Michael was talking about before with this model. I've got a couple other issues I want to bring up. This one's a little bit more specific about workers' compensation in New York State. So for worker cooperatives that want to structure themselves using the cooperative corporation statute, executive officers of corporations in New York State are required to calculate their workers' compensation based on assumed officer salary rates that the Workers' Compensation Board publishes. But these are often much higher than actual wages, especially at a startup company, right? And so this can be a financial burden to a company starting off, especially if they're thinking like, oh, we want to have a president, a vice president, a treasurer, a secretary, maybe some other officer positions on our board. They may end up racking up a very high workers' comp bill. So this is one of those really unique issues to us in this state anyways. It's true in some other states. I know our colleagues in Baltimore that support worker co-ops there also run into a similar thing with their workers' compensation law, which is something to be aware of and something to sort of navigate as we guide people toward different structures. Also, there's a strong need for worker cooperatives and all cooperative entities where there's a large group of people working together, a need for communication, conflict, and governance training and skill building on an ongoing basis. So co-ops that do really well at this like working together aspect, just as much as they're really good business owners, right? At making sure that stuff is actually included in what folks are seeking as far as the training that they need to get this thing going can often be the difference between something succeeding and something crashing and burning. Similarly, one of those cooperative principles that Cecilia mentioned earlier is ongoing education and training, and that's really crucial to maintain the internal culture of a cooperative business over time. As you have turnover, as people come and go, it's very likely that new employees in a worker co-op might not share the same interest in ownership as maybe the founding group or some prior groups did. But if there's ongoing training in what our cooperative model is, why we're about it, what our mission is as a company, it can help to kind of preserve that like vision that the co-op has over time. An interesting example of this is there's a region in Spain, the Mondragon region, which has a conglomerate of worker cooperative businesses, and something like 70 or 80,000 people all in this one region of the country are worker owners of various cooperatives. And they've noted over time, this region has been doing this worker co-op experiment for decades. I want to say 60 years at this point, maybe more. And some of sort of the younger crowd that are now working in these businesses feel really detached from the sort of like purpose of these worker co-ops at first. So even a strong worker co-op economy where there have been businesses around for a long time, they point to the need to have this ongoing training and education and like vision setting for folks in the company, because we have to deal with the rest of our economic system these co-ops exist within that tells us that like, oh, there's one person who owns the business and the rest of us just have to clock in and clock out and collect our paycheck. And that can be a really strong deterrent against sort of bucking the trend. Okay, so that's my little spiel on some of the issues that we've come across. And I'm gonna wrap us up pretty quickly, and I think I'm gonna skip over a couple slides to talk about our lending model, but we can talk more about that if there's questions. So Cooperation Buffalo, what we do, we directly incubate a select number of worker cooperatives. We're a very high touch business incubation service, so we can't handle a whole bunch of projects all at once. We work in depth with a handful of projects at a time. We've probably got 4 or 5 that are actively being incubated right now, and another like couple dozen that are in our pipeline and might be looking to launch within the next year and a half. We also offer technical assistance to other new and existing co-ops that might not fit our full mission. We're really trying to uplift folks who do not have opportunities for ownership or building wealth to be put into positions of ownership in worker cooperatives first and foremost. And then also we can offer some technical assistance on a fee-for-service model to other projects when we have the time. And then we also provide loan capital to co-ops in what we call a non-extractive way through a national loan fund that we're members of called Seed Commons. Seed Commons is structured as a cooperative, go figure, of locally based loan fund projects like Cooperation Buffalo all across the US. We're one of, I think, almost 30 member organizations of Seed Commons, and we democratically decide how to disperse that loan capital. We're now a loan fund of $40 million, which is really exciting. We've doubled in just about the past year, and have like well over 100 loans actively out there supporting worker-owned companies across the country. And I had a couple slides talking a little bit more about that lending process, but I think I'm going to skip it for time so that we can just start talking to each other. But yeah, like underscoring the fact that if you currently have any clients or folks that you're working with in your spheres of influence that are interested in this model, please have them meet with us. We meet with folks for free for at least one or a couple sessions to get them some resources, get them off the ground and started, even if they don't want to work with us to go like full on incubation with their project start to finish. We recognize that we are some of only a very few number of people who kind of have this skill set in the Western New York region. And so we want to make sure that our resources are accessible to as many people who want to proliferate cooperative business models as possible. Okay, so we talked a lot at you. We're going to step back now, and I'm thinking it's a small enough group, we can probably do this popcorn style, which just means you can come off mute and ask a question or make a comment if you'd like to. If we end up with a lot of people wanting to talk at the same time, we can sort of facilitate a stack so we can keep track of who's up next to talk. And I'm thinking maybe let's first just start with any like questions, comments, reflections on some of the material that we're presenting to you all. And then we can kind of transition from there into, I'd love to just do a go around and hear who everybody is so we could introduce each other and get to know each other a little bit more. Okay, I will step back. Anybody feel free to take the mic.
Sure. Hey, I'm Heidi Jones. I'm an attorney, and I have been working with worker co-ops for almost 10 years now, Andrew. Like not as a major component of my work, but it's important to me, and so I invest time in knowing what's going on. Any specific questions, Andrew, Michael, Celia?
Not at this point, unless you have any sort of like big reflections or comments about what we talked about so far. Otherwise, we can go around and meet somebody else.
Hi, Ryan here. Just dipping my toe into this world, but very interested. I'll add to your list of reasons of convincing, business owners to, create a co-op or sell to their employees or whatever is, owners that want to, there was some language at the beginning that was really good about workers versus capital and, which is which, and, just trying to make an effort to go against the current extractive model, and kind of, bring more wealth to the communities that need it and deserve it. So, and that's either through myself and my own company. I own a small bookkeeping firm, and that's a model that I'm interested in for kind of the long term, but also through helping other small businesses and cooperatives and kind of convincing them to go in this direction. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, two surprises for us in the 6 years that we've existed so far is just how many conversion projects have come to us. We expected that 90% of the projects we would see would just be startup businesses. There's a lot of people interested in conversion. And then the second surprise is that most of those are owners that do want to stick around and continue to be a part of the company, but just feel that this is a more ethical way to run their business, and also like don't want to be the only one that stresses about their company at 3 a.m. They want everybody to do that too, right? So it's like, can we share the burden a little bit more here? And so we've been dealing a lot more with those transitions where you also have to navigate the owner consciously stepping back enough to let other folks step up, because they're not just leaving, they're going to still be there, and their shadow is pretty long from the years of owning the business. And so navigating those like relationships changing can be really interesting. Cool. Who else wants to chime in?
Hello and good evening to all. My name is Melanie Page, and I was interested in the idea of a co-op ever since I heard about co-ops. But I'm also looking to start a nonprofit. We're a fledgling organization, so we don't have our 501c3, none of that good stuff. So I'm just playing around with options of how to structure what I imagine in my mind could actually exist, which would be a co-op community center where entrepreneurs were actually housed in the community center and could offer more services than it would be for profit. So I guess, I'm just trying to weigh out my options here to see what would be the best model. That's where I am right now.
I'm not trying to sales pitch you or anything. That is actually the stuff I do, is help people sort that question. So
beautiful. Okay. Heidi, is there a number I can call you at or reach you somehow? Are you in the chat maybe?
Awesome. Connections happening in real time. And yes, shared services cooperative is I think in the realm of what you might be talking about, with a bunch of businesses actually, even if they're individual, independent consultants, co-owning or co-managing a space or offering shared services to each other that they can get cheaper together, right? They all bundle together money to get a bookkeeping package rather than each business needing to do that on their own. And sometimes those types of cooperatives are operated at cost rather than for profit, right? Because the whole idea behind it is we're trying to do this cheaper for each other collectively, not necessarily needing to make extra money together. So yeah, so many different styles of these things, and Heidi would be a great person to talk to about that.
Okay. And just a quick question on that. Would it have to be the same type of service? I mean, if we were, say, under the umbrella of servicing families, but maybe in different aspects like financing or mentoring programs or, you know, that sort of thing, could it be a mixture? Or does it all have to be one thing? Do you understand what I'm trying to ask?
Short answer is I'm pretty sure you can offer several different things, but it's going to depend on exactly what the details of it are. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Totally.
If I may, I'll jump into on another connection. I don't know if you're familiar with the exchange at Beverly Gray, over on it's Utica and Jefferson, roughly around there. And Derek Parson is trying to get that going as kind of like a incubator startup type space to do.
Okay.
So a different model than co-ops, but maybe a similar objective. So it might be worth reaching out to him as well.
Okay, and that's Utica and Jefferson. Is that the library there, the old library?
It's on the opposite corner. I see Cecilia just put in a link.
Okay,
in
I
the
have to
chat
check
and
that
see if you find that.
chat. Okay. Thank you guys so much. Okay, I see
Nice
it.
to meet you, Melanie.
You as well. Thank you all.
Okay. Open floor if anybody else wants to jump in and introduce themselves or ask a question.
Clinton, I want to volunteer you.
Just watching my face, like trying to say like, I don't have anything to say. It's fine. Howdy. Yeah, my name's Clinton. So I am currently a facilitation junkie. No, I consult and teach on all manner of group process and conflict, and is like kind of overlapping with a bit of trauma stewardship and anti-oppression. And so that entails a lot of different stuff of just like how you run your meetings, what kind of governance structure you want to use, and how to make sure that that is running smoothly, delegation, leadership, any kind of stuff like that. Mostly I work with co-ops and intentional communities right now. I am not beholden to that exclusively, but that is my sweetheart, because that's where I learned all of this stuff from. So that's Clinton. I've got lots of things that I could spiel about in terms of like conflict and facilitation specifically, considering like that being like a really big weakness for a lot of little fledgling co-ops. The world that we live in does not prioritize and probably actively disincentivizes learning the skills or the vocabulary or the way of thinking about how to do any of this work. And so there's a really big kind of hurdle that is learning what you could refer to as like a cooperative culture as opposed to like competitive or capitalist culture. And like there's if you go in trying to run a cool new business together, but you are still thinking in the same like short-term investment, there is a victor, one person is in charge and everybody else is subservient, you end up running into a bunch of stuff that it can be dismantled, can be like overcome. But it's really hard to do it, especially when you don't even realize it's happening because you don't have a way of thinking about it in that way. I'm going to cut myself off there.
I just want to say really quickly that like we run a really intensive kind of course every year. It usually lasts an entire season for folks who want to start up worker cooperatives, and a solid third of the course is dedicated to the stuff that Clinton is talking about. Like that is how important it is. Like we consider it to be as important as knowing how to do, your finances and knowing how to, do a business plan and, all of the business skills. Like we put it on equal importance. I cannot like underscore how crucial it is to the flourishing of any co-op to be trained in the skills that Clinton has.
Yeah, actually, and harkening back to the Mondragon component, a really fun little snippet is that relatively early on, or like at least a while ago, Mondragon was trying to figure out how to handle like their growth, and were initially going on and hiring outside and like managers in their particular industries, and then had like a really huge schism with those new managers, because they essentially saw like, what's all this democracy stuff? This is cutting into our profits. We need to get rid of that. And so they ended up, instead of like booting all those people and realizing that they needed to train their own employees from the ground up to be able to do this kind of work, because the culture clash was so significant.
Thank you for that. Well, I'm not all about putting anyone on the spot, but I will say Adam or Neha or Marlon, if you would like to check in and say hi, please do. And if not, that's totally fine. Okay. Yes, Michael, are you going to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna speak for Adam, who also has a small human, and I think is tending to them. Yeah.
Yes, and I see that in the chat as well. Awesome. Any questions or topics of discussion that folks would like to get into with the next couple of minutes? I'm good either way. I don't want to keep people here who have yet to eat dinner or things like that. But if anyone wants to nerd out a little bit more about this, we could certainly talk all night about it. So please speak up.
What would you consider the next step to be for somebody who's interested as a professional to get involved?
That's a great question. The next clear step would be, if we haven't already, let's have a one-on-one and really get to know what services you offer that would be a good fit for some of the clients that we work with, and that would let us also run through our client list and say, oh, here's 3 people that could really use that kind of support right now. And I think just being able to have our Rolodex, do people use Rolodex anymore? Be a little deeper would be a great asset to us and to the co-ops we work with. So even for some of the folks I'm meeting for the first time tonight, this is awesome. And I would also say just definitely share, if you'd like to, your contact information in the chat with each other also, because I think if we're all interested in this, we're going to be talking to folks in our networks and communities who are, talking around business ideas like this. And the more we know each other and are in more constant communication, I think the better. Michael and Cecilia, does that sound right?
Yeah, I guess I'll just add really quickly that, like, we mentioned this when we were reaching out to folks about this, but like, my goal for this and for getting you all involved in the cooperative movement is not only to support local co-ops as they emerge, and they will continue to emerge. It's a relatively small community right now in Buffalo. Like, want to be upfront about that. But Cooperation Buffalo, like, we refer to ourselves as being in the startup phase. Like, we are still building our organization from the ground up. For many years, it was just Andrew was the only staff person before I joined, and I joined right before the pandemic hit. And then Cecilia has been with us for a few years as well. But it's just 3 of us trying to build the movement, but we have every intention of growing this community from just a handful of cooperatives to a large portion of Buffalo's economy. So we wanted to reach out to you like ahead of time to be like, be ready for clients, basically. Like we want to help you all in your professional endeavors as well to get clients as we are forming this kind of symbiotic relationship and building the cooperative movement. So I just wanted to like underscore kind of like the mutually beneficial goals that we have for bringing you all here.
What is the typical conversion timeline? So I'm thinking kind of far into the future for myself, but if someone's at kind of looking to exit a company, or is just starting the thought process, what do you see on that in terms of education, financing, going through the whole thing?
It varies a lot. We're part of a national collaborative of organizations that specialize in conversion called Workers to Owners, organized through a group called Democracy at Work Institute. And so we've been actually tracking some of this data for a few years. And I was just looking at a report a couple of days ago on that question, and it averages about a year. But something like half of the conversions that have already closed this year throughout the country that our groups anyways have worked on have been start to finish like 3 or 4 months. So just to give you a sense of like, it can be really fast when the time is right. And there's certainly more financing for these deals now than there was even 10 years ago that can move faster, not just from seed commons that we work with, but capital impact partners and shared capital and some other cooperative friendly lenders out there. And so, yeah, it'll depend on the complexity of the business and the deal, and how much certain other cultures or ways of working are already entrenched at that company. Kind of to Clinton's point, like culture change can take a while. And like the vision of both the selling owner and the incoming worker owners, right? Like some folks are okay with, let's just do the transaction and do the culture shift over time afterwards. And some folks want to build that culture shift and actually start operating more democratically or in a more participatory way for a few years before actually doing the transaction and selling the business. So there's some like practice turf when it's less scary. There was a business a couple of years ago that converted that was a little bit larger. I think it was like 50 employees that spent 10 years from the first time that the owner said, I know I'm going to retire. It's going to be about 10 years out, but I want to start building the culture for it now. And it took that long for them to actually close the deal. So that's kind of a long non-answer to your question, but it depends on the situation, and it can move fast. It can move fast. We helped a group of service workers restart a cafe that closed down last October, and they just launched in, at the beginning of this month, at the end of April. They had their grand opening in Rochester after buying out the equipment and the rights to the lease from the previous owner that shut down. So that was a pretty fast turnaround for us. It was under 6 months. Yeah. Good question.
So if I may, you guys you said you recently started. How long have you been in this area? And if it's appropriate to ask at the time now, what is like your success rate, or what are you finding your biggest challenges maybe? Maybe that's a 3-part question.
Yeah. Goodness, without going too much into like personal stories, I'm Buffalo born and raised. I actually was a part of a housing cooperative that Clinton was a part of too, not to throw you under the bus there, for a number of years. And that's where I learned a lot of sort of cooperative governance and management structures. And I was a part of that organization and that co-op for like 7 or 8 years, start to finish. So that's some of my personal experience in it. I got together with some other colleagues of mine who are in sort of like progressive nonprofit work locally, and also a couple of the founders of Bread Hive, the bakery over on the west side of Buffalo. Mm-hmm. When they started, they were the first worker co-op to sprout up here in a couple decades. And they said, we've got a model, we figured out how to do it, let's replicate it. So we all sort of came together to craft a plan for what an incubator might look like. And we officially launched ourselves in 2016, but with very part-time staff. And we've only had full-time staff since 2019, and we've only been at this size with the 3 of us for about a year. Our first project was converting a daycare center on Buffalo's west side called the Rose Garden to worker ownership back in 2017, 2018. They've been through some rough patches recently due to the pandemic, but they've got a reopening plan right now, which we're supporting them through still. And we just had that nice victory in Rochester with Anyone's Cafe and Bakery, which Heidi helped us in some crucial points on, actually. And we've been running, as Michael mentioned, our Cooperative Academy training program for 3 years now. The goal there is both to get new co-ops to start, but also just to train more entrepreneurs in this method of doing business. And so we've had 100+ people go through that in the 3 years, and 4 other projects have officially launched successfully after that training program. So those are some success stories, but it's hard, right? And the Rose Garden that we dumped a lot of our heart and soul into as our first project, getting them through the pandemic, getting a childcare center through the pandemic where you can't touch kids anymore or breathe on anybody, was incredibly hard. And so, and small businesses and micro businesses are very tough, can't sugarcoat that in any way. But I think these tools and these ways of doing business give folks more opportunity to stick around and solve these problems for themselves. And that's our goal.
Okay, thank you. You handled that well.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you all. We're a little bit past the hour. This could be a good place to call it unless anyone has anything else they want to share with us before we close out. Okay. I see a lot of contact info in the chat. Thank you so much for connecting with us and connecting with each other. We will share out a recording of this so that some of the content you can keep if you'd like to. And then please, like I said earlier, let's talk one-on-one if you haven't met with one of us one-on-one before, so we can keep building a relationship and share some clients and some of the experience that we've had with you. Thank you so much.